Georgia and David had been together for 3 years, and for the first two, it really felt like they were building something solid. They had their small routines like making late-night pancakes on Fridays and watching ridiculous reality shows, while pretending they were only doing it ironically. But slowly, little things shifted in the background, almost quite enough that Georgia kept convincing herself she was imagining it. It started with David being more protective over his phone, keeping it face down no matter where they were, taking it with him even when he went to shower, always closing apps the moment she walked by. Whenever she asked about it, he'd brush it off with a laugh and tell her she was acting strange, that he was just tired from work, or that she needed to relax. She wanted to believe him after all. They had been planning a future together, but something in her stomach kept twisting tighter every day. The tension became something she could actually feel in the air at home, floating around them during meals and conversations, making every interaction feel slightly off. Georgia kept trying to push the feeling away, focusing instead on planning for Stephen's arrival, doing her best to stay positive because she thought maybe she was just overwhelmed by pregnancy, by everything happening at the same time. But then her friend Michael told her he saw David in town one afternoon, sitting in a cafe with someone who definitely wasn't Georgia. Michael didn't want to jump to conclusions, didn't want to hurt her without reason, but he couldn't ignore what he saw either. When he told her, Georgia felt her heart sink into her ribs. That awful moment where you try to convince yourself there must be an explanation, even when you already know it's exactly what you feared. Still, she tried to give David the benefit of the doubt. She told herself maybe it was a coworker, maybe he was discussing work, maybe he was planning something for the baby. She invented so many possibilities just to keep the hurt from landing fully. But a few days later, while she was doing laundry, his phone pinged with a message. She wasn't trying to snoop. It was just there on the nightstand, lighting up repeatedly. A notification flashed with a name she didn't recognize, followed by a message preview that made her chest tighten. She didn't open it because she wanted to keep some dignity intact, but her hand shook as she folded shirts, pretending she didn't see what she saw. Later that week, her coworker pulled her aside with a strange expression on their face. They hesitated before telling her they accidentally came across David's dating profile while helping their cousin set up an account. Georgia felt something inside her go cold, but she just kept nodding, pretending she wasn't falling apart, even as her coworker showed her the screen in a whisper. And there it was, David's face, smiling in a way he hadn't smiled around her in months, under an active dating profile. Georgia didn't even hear the rest of what her coworker said. The world had narrowed to that single image. She thanked them for telling her and excused herself, walking outside the building like someone sleepwalking, her mind racing and hollow at the same time. She didn't confront David right away. Instead, she went home, sat in the living room quietly, and watched him move around the apartment like nothing was wrong. He joked with Jose on the phone, laughed loudly, played a game, asked her what she wanted for dinner, and she just sat there absorbing every detail, wondering how long he had been, living this double life while she tried so hard to build something real with him. She went to bed early, lying awake for hours with her hand resting on her stomach, Stephen kicking lightly as if sensing the storm inside her. The next morning, she told herself she needed proof, not just for herself, but because she knew David would try to twist everything, make her feel crazy the way he had before whenever she questioned anything. So she checked again and saw the profile still active, still updated, still very real. Something inside her finally snapped, not in anger, but in clarity. She needed to protect herself and her baby. She needed to stop pretending she didn't see the truth. She thought about calling Carol, about telling her everything. But for that moment, she just sat alone at the edge of the bed, breathing in slow, shaky breaths, staring at the future she never expected to face. And that was where it all truly began, the moment Georgia realized she couldn't keep denying what was happening. The moment the world she'd been trying so hard to hold together finally cracked open, pushing her toward a path she never imagined she'd have to take. Georgia woke up the next morning with that familiar heaviness in her chest, The kind that comes from knowing something is deeply wrong, but still pretending everything is normal. David was already up, humming in the kitchen like nothing in there. World had shifted, and she watched him move around as if he hadn't been living a secret life behind her back. She forced herself to act calm, to talk normally, because she already knew she couldn't confront him until she had her plan in place. She ate breakfast quietly, nodding along as he talked about a game he played with Jose the night before, her mind drifting far away from his words. When she went to work, she finally confided in Michael. She told him about the dating profile, the message on the phone, and the way David had been acting for months. Michael listened without interrupting once, his expression darkening with every detail. He offered to drive her home, to stay with her, to help her figure out a plan. And for a moment, Georgia almost broke down right there because it felt so good to have someone genuinely care about what she was going through. She hugged him tightly before leaving, promising she'd keep him updated. That night, she tried to act like everything was normal again, but David was in one of his moods. He kept making passive comments about how tired she looked, how being pregnant shouldn't be that hard, and Georgia clenched her jaw to stop herself from reacting. She kept reminding herself that blowing up now would ruin her chance to leave safely. Every time she went into the bedroom, she touched the drawer where she had started hiding documents, her ID, birth certificate, bank papers, anything she needed to protect herself and Stephen Dot over the next few days. She played the role David expected: quiet, apologetic, agreeable, because she needed him to stop paying attention long enough for her to prepare. She started keeping notes on her phone secretly, detailing things he said and did. The way he dismissed her pain, the nights he stayed out late with no explanation. She saved screenshots, kept a log of his comments, and acted like none of it bothered her. Carol called her one evening, sensing something was wrong even though Georgia hadn't said anything. Georgia almost told her everything but held back, simply asking about Carol's day while swallowing the urge to break down and beg for help right then. Things got worse one night when David brought Eddie and a couple of friends over without warning. Georgia was exhausted from work, Stephen pressing painfully against her ribs, and she was just trying to rest for a moment when David walked into the bedroom and told her she needed to get up and make the place look presentable. When she reminded him she wasn't feeling well, he sighed loudly and said she'd become dramatic since getting pregnant. His friends were in the living room laughing loudly, talking about games, drinking, and leaving garbage everywhere. She forced herself to walk through them to answer the door when food arrived, pretending she didn't notice Eddie giving her a concerned look when David snapped at her for being slow. Georgia cleaned up after them when they finally left. Around 2 a.m., her back aching so badly she had to stop and catch her breath every few minutes. David stumbled into the bedroom smelling like beer and tried to initiate sex, ignoring her repeated "no," until she finally pushed his hand away and rolled to the edge of the bed, silent tears falling while he muttered something under his breath about how she used to be fun. She waited until he fell asleep before sneaking into the bathroom, sitting on the floor with her knees pulled up, trying to hold herself together. The next morning, Georgia made a decision. She wasn't going to survive this if she stayed. She wasn't going to raise Stephen in an environment where cruelty was normal and kindness was optional. She called a lawyer recommended by a coworker and quietly set up a meeting. The lawyer told her to start gathering everything: bank details, medical records, proof of David's behavior, and to move slowly, carefully, and quietly. Georgia left the office feeling both terrified and strangely empowered, as if the simple act of planning an exit had reignited a small piece of strength she thought she'd lost. She kept up the act at home, smiling when David walked into the room, laughing at his jokes, cleaning up after him, doing everything he expected, because she knew that the moment he suspected a shift, he'd make everything harder. At night, she'd lie awake with her hand on her stomach, whispering to Stephen that she was doing all of this for him, that she wouldn't let him grow up seeing his mother treated this way. Every day drained her, but every day also brought her closer to freedom. She started packing small things when David was out: Stephen's new clothes, Her favorite items, toiletries she could hide without him noticing. She stored everything at Carol's house little by little, pretending each time she was just stopping by for lunch or dropping something off Dot one evening. David came home in a foul mood, slamming cabinets because he couldn't find something he misplaced. When Georgia tried to help, he snapped that she never did anything right and that the apartment looked like a mess because she couldn't keep up. She just nodded, quietly putting away dishes, refusing to let him see how deeply the words cut. Later, while she sat on the bed folding clothes, he scrolled through his phone with a smug little smile he didn't bother hiding anymore. She didn't ask. She didn't want to know. She'd already seen enough. But that night, lying awake listening to him snore beside her, Georgia realized she wasn't scared of leaving anymore. She was scared of what would happen to her and Stephen if she stayed, and for the first time in a long time, that fear gave her strength instead of taking it. Georgia spent the next week living in two different worlds. In one of them, she smiled when David walked in, made dinner when he asked, listened to him complain about tiny inconveniences, and acted like she wasn't drowning. In the other, she quietly prepared her escape packing small bags when he wasn't around, organizing documents, transferring bits of money into her separate account, and coordinating everything with Melissa. It felt like she was walking a tightrope, and every time David walked too close or looked at her a certain way, she felt her stomach twist with fear that he somehow knew David's behavior didn't get better. If anything, knowing she wasn't, fighting back seemed to make him more comfortable showing the side of himself she had been trying to ignore. He made little comments about her changing body, about how pregnancy shouldn't make her so slow, about how other women stayed fit until their due date. And every time he laughed afterward, she felt something inside her break a little. More. But she kept her face blank and her responses short because reacting now would only make things worse. One afternoon, she was at work when Michael noticed she looked paler than usual. He pulled her aside and asked her if she had eaten, if she had slept, if the baby was kicking normally. And Georgia felt her eyes burn because she couldn't remember the last time someone asked her how she was without expecting something in return. She told him she was okay, even though she wasn't, and Michael didn't push, he just told her to sit for a minute and brought her a glass of water, staying with her until she could breathe again. His quiet worry made her feel seen in a way she hadn't felt in years. That night, David came home irritated about something Jose had said, and he took it out on Georgia the moment he walked through the door. He complained about the groceries she bought, the dinner she made, the laundry she had folded. He nitpicked everything until she felt like she was shrinking under the weight of his voice. When she tried to excuse herself to rest, he rolled his eyes and muttered that pregnancy had made her unbearable. She didn't say anything, but her hand shook as she washed the dishes, and she had to stop twice just to steady her breathing. Later, when she went into the bedroom, she found messages on his unlocked phone, little reminders that she was not paranoid, not dramatic, not imagining things. He had been talking to someone again, someone he kept calling fun, someone he told he couldn't wait to get space. The anger that rose in her chest felt nothing like sadness this time. It felt like closure. She didn't confront him. She just turned off the phone, placed it where she found it, and went back to packing the small bag under the bed while he showered. She folded Stephen's tiny onesies with trembling hands, whispering to him that she was nearly ready, that he wouldn't grow up watching his mother be treated this way. The act of packing made her feel stronger, like every piece of clothing she tucked away was one more step toward safety. The next morning, Melissa met her for coffee. Georgia handed her the spare key to the new apartment she had secretly signed. And Melissa squeezed her hand so tightly, almost hurt. They sat there, two sisters who grew up protecting each other from everything, now planning one of the hardest things Georgia had ever done. Melissa promised to be ready the moment David left for his father's birthday weekend. She even joked lightly about bringing snacks to keep their energy up while moving, trying to ease the tension. And Georgia laughed for the first time in days. On the way home, Georgia stopped by a store to pick up a few last things for Stephen Small. Things she wanted him to have in the new place. Things David would never even notice missing. A soft blanket, a baby book, a tiny stuffed elephant. She held the blanket to her chest for a moment in the car, letting herself imagine what life could look like on the other side of all this. For the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel like a dark hallway. It felt like fresh air. When she got home, David barely looked at her, too busy yelling at a game and complaining to a friend about how busy he was dealing with a pregnant wife. She set the groceries down quietly, feeling invisible. When she couldn't find the strength to cook, she ordered takeout and left his plate on the table. He didn't thank her, but she didn't expect him to anymore. That night, she lay awake, again with her hand on her stomach. Stephen was kicking steadily, like he was reminding her he was there. And she whispered to him again, promising that she wouldn't let him grow up thinking this was normal. She closed her eyes and pictured the new apartment, the empty walls waiting for photos, the quiet rooms where she would be able to breathe, the crib that would arrive in a few days. She imagined waking up without fear. She imagined peace, for the first time that hope didn't feel impossible. It felt close. David kept unraveling faster than Georgia expected, and every lie he told seemed to crumble the moment he opened his mouth, making it easier for her to see just how deeply he trapped himself. She still played the supportive partner, pretending to believe every excuse he gave, nodding softly as he talked about work stress or failed business deals. While inside, she repeated every detail back to Michael so they could plan their next moves calmly and carefully. She watched David pacing around the apartment some nights, whispering into his phone, saying he was handling everything, while Michael quietly recorded every timestamp that exposed he wasn't where he claimed to be. Georgia no longer felt hurt when he lied. She felt almost detached, studying him like a stranger who didn't realize he was walking into a storm of his own making. The more desperate David became, the more reckless he acted, selling off small valuables, borrowing money from Jose, even asking his mother Janie for a temporary boost, all while trying to maintain the illusion that he had everything under control. Georgia let him talk, let him spin stories, never arguing, never pushing, giving him nothing to use against her, nothing that could make her look unstable or dramatic in the aftermath. Every calm response she gave made him bolder, and his carelessness ended up exposing far more than she expected, including receipts from nights he swore he was homesick and messages he thought he'd deleted that Michael easily restored. Georgia would sit on the edge of the bed some evenings, pretending to fold laundry while David showered, scrolling through proof of betrayal with a steady breath she didn't know she was capable of. Michael grew more protective as the days passed, constantly reminding her that the truth was already enough to break David without her saying a single harsh word. He helped her back up every screenshot, every voicemail, every bank statement stored in 3 separate places, so nothing could magically disappear when David realized his facade was collapsing. The calmness Georgia carried in front of David made him feel safe, made him think she was still the same forgiving, loyal partner he could manipulate with a soft apology. And he didn't notice how she had stopped asking questions, or how she no longer reacted emotionally to anything he said. David believed silence meant compliance, but Georgia's silence was the beginning of his ending. By the time the final week approached, Georgia had already moved her important belongings to Michael's spare room without raising suspicion, pretending to reorganize old boxes while secretly taking her documents, sentimental items, and everything David could later try to claim as his. She slept beside him with a quiet strength, knowing she was already gone in every way that mattered. And David snored peacefully without realizing he was losing her inch by inch. When he told her he might need her to cover another bill just until things stabilize, she looked him in the eyes and agreed softly, giving him the exact reassurance he depended on. And he didn't notice how calmly she watched him dig himself deeper. Every piece was in place, and David still thought he was in control, still believed he could juggle lies smoothly enough to keep both his double life and his illusions intact. Georgia didn't rush him, didn't expose anything too soon, allowing him to walk confidently into the trap built entirely from his own choices. And the night before everything finally collapsed, she stood at the kitchen counter, wiping down a plate while David scrolled through his phone behind her, thinking she was the same woman who once cried for his attention. But her hands didn't shake anymore, her heart didn't race anymore, and as she placed the clean dish back into the cabinet with steady movements, David remained completely unaware that Georgia had already prepared the truth that would destroy him in ways he never saw coming. The morning everything fell apart for David started quietly, almost peacefully, with him leaving early and telling Georgia he'd be back late because he had things to figure out. The moment the door shut behind him, she took a slow breath and called Michael, who showed up within minutes carrying the last empty boxes. Together, they moved through the apartment with a calm efficiency, gathering the final things that belonged solely to Georgia, including the baby items she'd hidden in her closet and the documents she kept under the bed. She glanced around the living room once more, realizing how much of herself she'd given to a space that had never truly cared for her, and the bittersweet relief of letting it go washed over her in a way she hadn't expected. By noon, Michael had already loaded her belongings into the car, and Georgia walked through the apartment one last time, taking quiet photos of everything left behind so there could be no lies later about what she'd supposedly taken. On the kitchen counter, she placed the folder containing every piece of truth David believed she'd never find: screenshots, bank records, messages, recordings, and a quiet timeline of his own decisions. Next to it, she left the note she'd rewritten a dozen times, a simple explanation written in her calm handwriting, telling him she knew everything and that she wasn't waiting for another apology that would never mean anything. She locked the door behind her without hesitation and followed Michael down the stairs, each step feeling lighter than the last, and for the first time in months, she didn't feel scared or trapped. When her phone began buzzing nonstop as they reached the car, she didn't even look at the screen. She knew exactly who it was and exactly what stage of panic he was in. Michael reached over and gently silenced the phone before starting the engine, telling her she didn't need to hear any of it now, and Georgia let the sound fade into the distance as they pulled away. Hours later, when David finally walked into the empty apartment and realized she was gone, the messages turned frantic, then angry, then strangely confused, as if he couldn't understand how the woman he thought would always stay had slipped through his fingers without raising her voice once. Georgia read none of them. Instead, she sat on Michael's couch with a cup of warm tea and her hand resting on her stomach, whispering to baby Stephen that they were finally safe and that this was the beginning of everything she hadn't known she deserved. By the next morning, David had shown up at Carol's house demanding answers no one intended to give him, and when he realized how much evidence Georgia had left behind, the shock hit him harder than any argument ever could. For years he counted on her patience, on her love, on her willingness to forgive, and he never imagined she would walk away quietly while holding every truth he tried to bury. The same friends who once enabled him now stepped back, uncomfortable with the reality he'd created. And even Jose refused to defend him when the full story came out. Georgia spent the next few weeks settling into a small, bright place that finally felt like a home, with a window that let in morning sun and a quiet corner where she planned to set up Stephen's things. Carol visited nearly every day to help her unpack, and Michael handled the calls from the lawyer shielding her from hearing David's excuses or sudden attempts to paint himself as the victim. Even Jamie reached out with a sincere apology, devastated by what her son had done, but Georgia kept her boundaries firm and protected the peace. She had fought so hard to find Dot, and when Stephen finally kicked so strongly one evening that she burst into tears, she realized those weren't the tears of a woman who had lost something. They were the tears of someone who had saved herself just in time. Georgia looked around her quiet new home, knowing David would never again decide her worth, never again break her down in front of others, never again mistake her kindness for weakness. She had walked away without shouting, without blaming, without threatening to leave. She simply left. And that, more than anything, was what destroyed him. Georgia rested her hand on her belly and whispered softly that their life was going to be different now. Safer, brighter, free. And as she lay back on the couch with Michael's blanket around her, she finally felt the truth settle in her chest. She wasn't alone. She was finally living for herself and for Stephen, and nothing David did could ever pull her back into the shadows she'd left behind.